Sony just announced that they're releasing a PS1 classic, and whether or not it's a cash grab is up for a debate that I ain't going to get into. Instead, I decided to take a look at some PS1 classics from my childhood, and there was one game that really stood out to me: Ape Escape. Oh, and I also remember this weird game I played that had a misleading E for everyone rating. You know what? Let's talk about that. I'll save Ape Escape for another day. While this game is pretty weird, it's the violence that warrants attention, but YouTube would have a problem with the video titled "The Most Violent Kids Game Ever," so we'll stick with weird instead. The game is Heart of Darkness, released in 1998, which already should raise some red flags as it shares a name with the book that Apocalypse Now uses as inspiration. Before I go into what made this game so violent, I thought it would be nice to look at the game's history and what it's actually about. First and foremost, Heart of Darkness is a game created by Alik Shahi, I hope that's how you say that, who is more known for creating the cult classic Another World, or Out of This World, or Outer Heaven, depending on where you live. Actually, I don't think it's fair to call Another World a cult classic, considering it was a big hit when it first came out, and it ain't a cult if it was already popular. Basically, if you're already aware of Another World, you might know what Heart of Darkness has in store for you. At its core, Heart of Darkness is basically a spiritual successor for Another World, particularly in the gameplay sense. But it never reached the same level of popularity and adoration, and a large part of that is due to setbacks and delays. Development began in 1992, it was announced in 1995, and it wasn't actually released until 1998. It's like if Jay Electronica decided to try and make a game. It took so long to come out that it was announced for a console before the console's release, and the console died before the game even came out. But let's be honest, no one was begging mom and dad for a 3DO interactive multiplayer, a garbage name I might add. After that, it was supposed to be a Sega Saturn exclusive when they signed the deal in 1996. Still, the game took too long to come out and the Saturn became commercially unviable. The whole development was described as quickly becoming a joke of a situation. The game looked absolutely amazing when it was first cited at an ECTS trade show a year or 3 ago, but unless it has radically changed from its sightings at E3 in May 1996, it's going to be outdated and outclassed by its contemporary software. But the bulk of the blame isn't entirely on Eric and his crew. He had a hell of a lot of challenges. Not only did he have to deal with continually changing technology with things like the CD-ROM coming in as well as 3D games becoming the norm for gaming, Eric had to deal with working with a team in the studio, which he didn't have to do when he made Another World, so of course there were going to be growing pains. Then they lost their funding about 4 years into development. Still, they persevered because they weren't going to give up on something after working on it for so long. Honestly, I'm not sure if that would happen today. They kept working, secured more funding, and finally released the game. And it just sputtered out. While the game was great and very original, it didn't fit in with the games that were coming out at the time, so it faded into obscurity. Maybe that's how they snuck by with the E rating, or whatever the EU had going on at the time. So, what made this game weird? First, I have to talk about the story, because it really helps to drive it all home. It's simple. Andy, a little boy who is terrified of the dark, has to travel to a place aptly named Darkland to save his dog Whiskey, that was kidnapped by aliens. Andy then builds a spaceship and crashes it on an alien world, or should I say, another world. The overall theme is about conquering your fears to achieve greatness to become a better you. It's also all a dream, or not really? Sure, there are hostile environments and shadow creatures that all try to stop Andy, but all this so far sounds like a kid's game. Like a more complex Pajama Sam Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, a top 10 game of its own, by the way. So what's the weird violent part? Everything on this godforsaken planet is trying to viciously murder this young boy, viciously. A lot of the monsters just try to eat him, viciously. And honestly, his shit life on Earth isn't that much better. I mean, the first thing in the game is Andy being thrown into a crawl space by his teacher. And I did say he was terrified of the dark, right? The 90s were a different time, man. The deaths in this game are brutal. You have things as simple as falling off a cliff to drowning to getting snatched up and gobbled on by a shadow monster. And by far, the worst ones are the ones where you can see his limbs dangling out, like when you get crushed by a pillar or when you're eaten by a sea monster. And yes, this already sounds brutal, but when you factor in the art direction of this game, it's all enhanced. Alik Shahi's art style is present in both of his games, with Heart of Darkness being more detailed. They have an old school fluidity to it that makes you feel all the movements, and this is best shown when Andy is killed. His body looks like it's made up of mush or liquid, and it drives home how lifeless his body becomes when he dies. The best example of this is with the cliff worm, where he's dragged into a hole but his legs are flailing until he's killed and his legs droop lifelessly. It's really visceral and uncomfortable if you're not prepared for it, like say a kid who's playing this because of a E for everyone rating. Wait, no, I lied. The Shadow Captain is way worse. And he gets his head chomped on and his body stretched like a rubber band or something, and then he's eaten. At least the chomp killed him quickly. I can go on and on about the different deaths in the game because they are honestly really varied and interesting, but I would just be talking all day. I do think these deaths are way worse than the ones in the Tomb Raider reboot. The only thing the Tomb Raider game has on this is that Tomb Raider is newer, and it doesn't have a boy using the same voice line every single time. I could stop the video here and be confident that I made my argument, but there is one more thing that just makes it so funny to me that it got the rating that it did. While Another World might have been more mature than Heart of Darkness was definitely the harder game. Like, way harder. This is a puzzle platformer that is very much trial and error. Trial and a lot of error. Some of the puzzles are real convoluted, which is to be expected from an old game, but the controls are also a bit tricky. Andy has a little startup animation when running and doing other actions, which I think was a design choice to better fit the art direction, but it gets real annoying doing really tight jumps that will kill you in a heartbeat if you don't time it near perfectly. And as a nice little cherry on top, you still have to deal with the monsters that want to kill you at any cost. Most of the time, fighting the monsters end up being trial and error as well, as they can dodge Andy's attacks. All of this comes together for a frustrating game, not to mention the difficulty ramp at the end. Even still, I enjoy the game, but just don't give it to the little ones. And later releases of the game actually did change the rating, so someone must have eventually realized what was actually in the game. And there you have it, the weirdest and most violent kids game of all time. What did you think of the video? If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe. And do you have any other games that you feel are crazier, or do you remember this game? Be sure to let me know in the comments, I'd love to read them, but for now, have a good day.